evening, everyone. We'd like to thank you for, there's a bag here on the floor, just a second. Sorry about that. We'd like to thank you so much for coming out this evening to this wonderful event. This is an incredible lecture being given by Dr. Philip Schoenberg, and before I turn the proceedings over to him, I will tell you a little bit about him. He did his undergraduate and master's degrees at San Jose State University, and from there he went on to University of New Mexico at Albuquerque to earn his PhD in philosophy. And the subject of his dissertation was the Canadian philosopher Charles Taylor. And from there he came here to Western. And he's been here, he came here last fall. And he teaches philosophy and very interesting philosophy courses. Like right now he's teaching a course called Wilderness in the Age of Philosophy. One of his research interests currently is environmental philosophy, especially deep ecology. So I'd like to turn things over to Dr. Philip Schoenberg. Thank you so much. Everybody give him a hand.
All right, so I think I can you hear me in the back if I don't use amplification? All right, that's better because I think my voice carries pretty well, and I prefer to maybe walk a little bit. All right, so what I want to talk about today is the idea of philosophy, and in particular I want to talk about an ancient, or a very, in some sense even the original ideal of philosophy that we find in first the classical Greek and later the Hellenistic era, and suggest that we need to get back to it, or that it holds some value for us in the modern world, and maybe we can have a little conversation about that. So you can help me think more deeply about it. Philosophy, no matter where you go with it, ancient or modern, is about conversation. Yeah. So hopefully we'll have a little chat following my initial comments. Also, I want to point out that the schedule is 5:30 to 7. That's a long time, so I don't expect to go until 7. So, all right. So philosophy, reviving philosophy as a way of life. I should also note that giving this talk was inspired by a National Endowment of the Humanities fellowship that I had this past summer on this topic, reviving philosophy as a way of life. I spent 2 weeks in Wesleyan University in Connecticut with a group of scholars, living in the dorms like a bunch of undergraduates for 2 weeks, and reading like mad, and going to class every day for 8 hours a day. It was really crazy. But we had a good time, and I wanted to sort of share some of the fruits of that, and here we go. Let's see. So philosophy, this is what you get anytime any introductory course in philosophy. The first slide in any PowerPoint, any professor that you might see, is going to be the etymology of the word philosophy. It comes from philia, which is Greek for love, and Sophia, which is Greek for wisdom. So it is fundamentally, and I think there's a lot of, it's important to go back to this. We have to ask ourselves, what does that mean, the love of wisdom? For one thing, it does not mean, what it does not mean is the achievement of wisdom, right? Philosophy is about seeking the truth, or seeking knowledge, seeking wisdom, right? It's not about its achievement. And yeah, it's not about the achievement of wisdom, but the pursuit, the love of wisdom. What's important about this idea of philosophy is the love of wisdom, or the pursuit of wisdom, is that it's something that you do, right? And it implies that the philosophy is something that should inform your life and help hold it together and give it direction, right? And the metaphor here, the classic one from our title of our talk, is the philosophy is a way of life. It's a path, and it's a way of life. Or it's perhaps better to say ways of life in the plural. Okay. So there's contemporary philosophy, and then there is the ancient philosophy. The ancient Greek philosophy, I should specify. I'm focusing mainly on ancient Greek, the classical and Hellenistic period of the Greeks, and also a little bit of what's called the imperial period after 31 AD. But at any rate, we're definitely in the West. We're in Europe and the Mediterranean basin, right? However, this concept of philosophy as a way of life is not unique to the West, right? In fact, it would be very common to include, at least, Buddhism and Confucianism also as philosophies, as ways of life. But here we're focusing mainly on the Greek tradition in the West, European intellectual tradition. All right, so today philosophy is generally broken up into departments, right? Again, this would be a slide from my intro to philosophy class, day 1, right? Philosophy is this. And we ask questions. We ask questions such as, what can I know? Or what is knowledge? And that we call epistemology, from the Greek episteme, for knowledge. Or we ask, what is real? Right? What is the ultimate foundation of reality? And that science of reality, the study of reality, is called metaphysics. And then we study ethics, which asks the question, or attempts to answer the question, seeks wisdom in the field of human behavior, right? Human action, moral action. And it asks the question, or ethicists will ask the question then, what is it right to do? This would be the best way to put it. What is it right to do? And then there's logic. And I originally, when I made this slide, put this in parentheses, because logic is not so much an independent department in philosophy or independent subject, but it's the tool that's used in all the others, right? It's rational thought and logic, critical thinking and reasoning, as we would say today. The title, of course, here in question, right? And it's in fact, Aristotle. We'll talk a lot more about him. He was the father of logic in many ways. He called his his works on logic collected together were traditionally called the organon, which is Greek for the tool. So logic is really the tool of philosophy, even in the ancient as well as the modern. At any rate, what's different about this breakdown in the approach to philosophy in the modern or the contemporary approach is that ethics is just another department, right? This setup, you could do epistemology, theory of knowledge, all day long throughout your entire career as an academic philosopher and never actually get around to ethics. Similarly, you could study theory of reality. You could do metaphysics your entire career and never get around to talking about ethics. And also, I don't want to get too far ahead of myself here, there's a difference in the conception of ethics itself. So 2 differences. One is that for the ancients, ethics was central to philosophy. The second one is the conception, and you couldn't do any of the other activities, or you couldn't participate in philosophy at all without focusing on ethics. So it was central. It was the central focus of all philosophy. The second thing that's different about between the ancient and the modern conception is the very conception of ethics. For the ancients, ethics was not so much about right or or individual actions or what is it right to do. They were interested in the question of how is it best to live? Or my favorite formulation of this is, how shall I be? Right? What is good? What is the good life for a human being? There are different ways of formulating this. But it was about ways of life. How shall I live? Right? And it was rational inquiry into the nature of things, and based on the way things are, how should I live? That may be one good formulation. How are things, right? And then, how shall I live in response to that? What does it mean to be a human being, and how shall I live in response to that? I have one example here too, but I don't know that we'll do both of them. I'm going to talk a little bit later about the ethics of Aristotle, who's pretty exemplary of the ancient view of ethics. So those are the two differences. The very conception of ethics. Today, we think of ethics as or morality, which is just really, morality is just the Latin translation of ethics, right? They're the same term for us, as for specialists. And, hi, how's it going?
Hi.
So, at any rate, I just got nervous. So, what was I saying? Ethics. So if we talk about ethics or morality today, or if you want to have an ethical conversation with someone, you're expecting to talk about something like the death penalty, right? Is it right or wrong? Or abortion, right? If you take a moral issues course in any American university, those are the kinds of things you're going to approach. And the approach to ethics then, that's presupposed there, is that it's about individual actions and whether or not they're right or wrong, not about what kind of a person you should be and how you should live your life as a whole, or by what rational principles should you lead a life, as we say. And so contemporary moral theories tend to focus on that and attempt to develop a procedure for determining right action. Ancient theories of ethics focus rather on what is it good to be. All right, so that's a big difference. Yeah, I have a lot more here. I'm going to skip. It's good. All right. Central concept in classical, or in the ancient view, central concept is eudaimonia. This is a Greek word I make all of my students learn. It's a good word. Because there isn't a good translation. You got to learn it in Greek. There's not a good translation in English. Got a handful. There's a couple of options there that I prefer as translations. Well-being. That's a little bit confusing, I think, oftentimes at the first gloss. But also flourishing. Flourishing is my favorite, and when we get to Aristotle, I think it'll make a lot of sense why. Flourishing has a connotation of what something naturally does for the thing that it is. And then it's important to note that for the Greeks, and poems in the Greek tradition, it's different than a feeling, right? We think of happiness today as something that you feel, or as primarily a feeling, I guess I should say. The Greeks, there's a difference between being happy, well-being, flourishing, or happiness. Happiness is the most common and not incorrect translation of eudaimonia. But I think it's confusing because we mistake it for what we think of as happiness today. And we think of happiness primarily as a feeling, as a psychological state or state of mind, right? For the Greeks, it was something you do. So it's the difference between being happy, maybe, and feeling happy, as one person puts it. It's definitely not a feeling, though. It's an activity, something that we do. Not a state of mind, or not only. It involves the emotions, but in a very different way. So this is Raphael's School of Athens. And it all does, in the Western tradition, go back to the Greeks. Very famous painting. And you'll notice that right in the center, these two guys here, and I can't name all the other Greeks, but all the Greek philosophers are depicted here. But right here in the very middle, teaching them all, as it were, are the two major influences on the Western intellectual tradition, Plato and Aristotle. I should have a slide later, I guess. Stuck to my script. Okay. I can't remember why I had the School of Athens, perhaps just because I like it. So I can say more about it. We have another slide. This is a close-up of Aristotle. So I'm going to quote. This is a quote here, generalizing about another difference between ancient and modern philosophy. Right? This is by Cooper, whose book we just got in at the library. You can take it out. Called Pursuits of Wisdom by John Cooper. Don't endorse everything he has to say, but I think it's new. It's a fairly recent work, and he's part of this interest in reviving philosophy as a way of life. All right, so Cooper says, for these thinkers, that is the ancient philosophers, only reason and what reason could discover and establish as the truth would be ultimately acceptable as a basis on which to live a life. Right? So reason is our ability to seek the truth. And for them, philosophy is nothing more but also nothing less than the art, discipline that develops and perfects the human capacity for reason. The other major influence on this idea of reviving philosophy's way of life is Pierre Hadot, and this is my book, so you can't take it, but I brought it to show it to you. This collection of essays by the French philosopher Pierre Hadot, who died in 2010. He was a scholar of Plotinus, and he's been very influential. But anyway, so I highly recommend his works. He has a book called What is Ancient Philosophy with a question mark. It's kind of a silly title, but it's actually a really good book that I highly recommend. I couldn't find a copy of it to bring tonight. It's excellent. All right, so so reason is important. There's all right, so what happens then? What is it that happened to this ancient ideal of philosophy as a way of life? How is it that we got all the way here to the modern world where we've lost touch with the role that reason might play as a governor, as it were, of our life? How did we get there? It's a long story. A couple of things, though. One is the emergence of Christianity, right? Christianity comes on the scene, and it very quickly realizes that it's in competition with these philosophies as a way of life, right? There were many different philosophies at the time, and so one reading of Christianity sees it as sort of in reaction to this from the early imperial period, and its reaction to the existing philosophies as a way of life, the pagan philosophies as a way of life, and Christianity, which early Christianity actually called itself the way. Right, did understand itself in some sense as a way of life. But what is it that makes it, and as it gains hegemony in the Roman Empire, you start seeing the pagan ways recede, right? Until they're pretty much gone, except as vestiges throughout the Middle Ages. The other thing that happens is the Enlightenment. The other thing that happens is the Enlightenment. And the professionalization of academic philosophy. Beginning with Kant, philosophy becomes increasingly something that's done in a university. Prior to Kant, well, and in the Middle Ages, the schoolmen, right? But after Kant, it becomes deeply professionalized. It's something that you study like any other discipline. So we have this other distinction. There's philosophy as a way of life, and then there's scholarship on philosophy, right? In fact, beginning with Kant, philosophers become more and more professional academics, which is what I am, right? We write scholarly papers, and it gets more and more farther and farther away from real life. And this has, I think, some pretty negative effects of making the subject increasingly irrelevant to ordinary people There's a sense in which, in order to be a philosopher, somehow you've got to go get a PhD in philosophy, or major or minor in philosophy, right? But philosophy is something that, according to the old understanding, is something anyone can do, right? You just need the will to do it, and good practice at using reason critically, right? Anyone can do it. So all of my students, I tell them, you can be philosophers. You don't need to, you need to study philosophy, but you don't need a degree in philosophy to be a philosopher, to begin to think. It's not merely an academic thing. So I submit that the negative effect of making the subject increasingly irrelevant to our lives. Moreover, I think that we might really gain as a society from a return or a revival of the ancient ideal of philosophy, which, though it was kind of never really lost, has been marginalized in our culture. For example, and this also means that certain thinkers, who I would clearly want to count as a philosopher, do not get counted in the sort of ad hoc philosophical canon, right? My favorite is Ralph Waldo Emerson. Is he a philosopher? He certainly didn't do the kinds of things that academic philosophers did. But he was much closer to this ancient tradition of philosophy. And I think if you read him with that in mind, it makes perfect sense to include him. And in fact, he was deeply influenced by the Hellenistic thinkers and some of the Roman Platonists as well. All right. This is another difference that Cooper brings out, and I think is pretty interesting. He points out that another commonality in the ancient philosophies is that only reason and what reason could discover and establish as the truth could be ultimately acceptable as a basis upon which to live a life. For them, philosophy is nothing more about that. I already did. I understand that. We'll go straight to this. Are there any questions? Sorry, first gloss on this.
Why was self-help in there? You skipped it.
I know I skipped it. So you want to see the slide that I skipped?
Yeah.
Self-help. I guess there's one risk here, and you see this also with Emerson studies, some risk of seeing this approach to philosophy as somehow inferior to contemporary academic philosophy because it's just self-help. You know, isn't Seneca just like, you know, the Oprah of his day or the Dr. Phil of his day, and can't we just sort of write it off? And how is it different from the sort of contemporary self-help? I think it's very different. It's very different. Self-help movement is not an attempt to, well, maybe we can come back to it. What I was going to formulate, I can't quite find it right now. It is, however, a kind of therapy, and this is not an uncommon claim. It is a kind of therapy for life. It's how to get through it. Yeah? It's how to get through it. And also, it's not a lifestyle merely, but a way of life. And that's the distinction that I think I'm increasingly interested in. And it goes back to our first question on, is it just self-help? I think self-help is mostly, I mean, I don't watch a whole lot of television and stuff, so I'm generalizing about some of these personalities, and I really never seen an Oprah show or a Dr. Phil show. So I'm just repeating prejudices that I have about them. But whatever I would say is, my point is rather that self-help is about lifestyle, right? It's not an attempt rationally to determine a set of doctrines upon which you can build a life that you internalize, right? And use that internal set of doctrines that you have rationally justified to lead your life, right? That's we use that very interesting metaphor. We lead a life, right? And so I think my feeling is, I'm happy to be corrected on this, but the self-help movements or the self-help gurus out there are really on this superficial level of lifestyle. You know, oh, you've got to change this and have a different attitude and la la la. And there's a little bit of this, especially in the Romans, right? Seneca is kind of this way. So there is a little bit of overlap. I'm not above suggesting that. I'm not above seeing a little bit of overlap or commonality. I think the individualism and subjectivism of most forms of contemporary sort of self-help movements are probably also make it very different from the ancient approach. I think maybe when we look at Aristotle, who's next, when I wanted to go to, thank you, Heather. When we look at Aristotle, maybe it'll make a little more sense. He's not Dr. Phil. Yeah. Cool. He's not Dr. Phil. He's Aristotle. Have you? I've seen his face before. And I think I never actually watched his show. I'm pretty ignorant of popular culture in general. So.
I do think it might be interesting for you to investigate the whole kind of human potential movement, which started in the 70s, and all these people are coming out of, because I think you'll find that they are appropriating or using some of your kind of the things that you're interested in.
Sure. I think you're not the first person to suggest the human development movement to me, actually. So I appreciate that. So now I'm going to give you the short course. It's a super short course. What time do we have?
We have those set.
It's not too late. Have I eaten up all my time yet? It's almost 6 o'clock. All right. I have that nervous, lose all sense of time kind of feeling right now.
Struggling.
All right. So I'm going to go for something to drink. Aristotle was, there we go. There's the School of Athens again. Plato and Aristotle here in the middle. There's a blow-up. Plato is the teacher. Socrates behind all of this, of course. All the ancient schools of philosophy, they all sort of try to appropriate Socrates as their founder, right? They always go back to him as a touchstone. He was incredibly influential. But at any rate, Socrates is the teacher of Plato. Plato is the teacher of Aristotle. What's interesting about this is, I mean, everyone points to, we won't talk about the metaphysics, but there's a lot here in the hand motions. Aristotle is pointing out into the world, right? And Plato is pointing up into the heavens. So we can talk about that. What I want to talk about is the book right here in Aristotle's hand. It's his Ethics. It's probably the Nicomachean Ethics, but just as good. His Ethics was incredibly influential, and I think still is. It's had a bit of a resurgence in the last 40 years, and especially since the 1990s, in philosophy. So he's increasingly interesting to thinkers today. 384, 322 BC. Very famously, he was the tutor, for a very short time, of Alexander the Great. Yeah. This is, I just put this slide up here because I like it. This is a 15th century little statue of Plato and Aristotle. And what are they doing? They're doing what philosophers do. They're arguing. They're reasoning. Looks like they're having a fight. He's really, really into it. He wants to get his point across here. And Aristotle is the young, beardless guy, and Plato is the bearded one there. And Plato and Aristotle, he's pointing at a book. It's like, it's really great. So Aristotle begins with so book 1, section 1, the Nicomachean Ethics, which is an interesting title. I guess I don't really have a slide for this, but his son was named Nicomachus. Okay? Why would you name a work on ethics after your son? This is an interesting question for fathers and mothers in the audience. If you were to write a book on ethics, why would you call it after your children? You It's the ancient concept. What's that?
You'd want your child to follow these ethics.
Yeah. What more do you want for your children that they're happy, right? And for the Greeks, being happy and being good was like that. Yeah. Who more do you want? Now for the Greeks, I won't get back to that. So yeah, he begins with this statement: every skill and every inquiry, and similarly every action, rational choice, is thought to aim at some good. And so the good is rightly described as that which everything aims. So this is an important concept. It's the use of the word good here, right? End. It's the end or goal. It's that at which all things aim. So the idea is that everything we do has a good that's relative to that activity, right? We do something. So Aristotle, it's kind of a weird place to begin. You think, okay, but it is about human activity. It's about what we do, right? Everything that we do, every inquiry, every skill, every action. If you're a carpenter, the good of carpentry is the house. It's the end of the goal. It's the good of that activity, right? And there's a lot of things that we do. So Aristotle begins by asking, is there something that is like the highest level good of our whole life? Is there, he thinks there is there a supreme good? Something that's kind of the point of everything that we do for its own sake, and then you don't do for the sake of anything else. When we build a house, the activity of home building is, the good of it is the house. But we build a house because we want to have a roof over our head, right? We always do something for something else. We don't do it. Is there something that we do only for its own sake? And if we knew what that was, well, it would be the highest good. So if what is done has some end, we want for its own sake and everything, isn't there something, it can't go on to infinity, because the Greeks hated infinity, freaked out by it, but they can't go on to infinity, so whatever that has to be the chief or supreme good. A couple other features of his ethical theory. One is, he's going to find out what the highest good, what the point of our life is. What is the highest good? That's a pretty tall order. And he's going to do it with reason. And knowing what that good is going to help us achieve it. So it's going to regulate our life, regulate the leading of our life. Again, you see that basic ancient structure. It's not that they're not interested in right action or right and wrong, the way contemporary thinkers are, but their first approach, their first question is, how are we supposed to be living? What is it that we're supposed to be doing or achieving in our life? This is another feature that I think is nice. This is about human beings' lives. And my life, most human beings' lives are pretty sloppy. And so you're not going to have a perfect degree of precision. In ethics, you're not going to get the kind of precision that you get, say, in geometry. And this is another, there's a nice criticism available here of contemporary ethical theories, right? A very famous one, very influential one, is utilitarianism, right? Wish I had a real chalkboard. Utilitarianism is a contemporary view. John Stuart Mill is the main, most important endpoint. Jeremy Bentham is the founder of utilitarianism. And utilitarianism is a form of what's called consequentialism. Right? Consequentialism defines right and wrong action, again, individual actions, based on whether or not the outcome, consequence, is good. And you get different forms of consequentialism by varying what counts as a good consequence, right? Utilitarianism says that the good consequences you should be shooting for is the greatest happiness for the greatest number, right? So you can, there's an app for that, right? What you're doing is you're quantifying happiness in terms of pleasure, how much pleasure is produced by a set, or would be projected to produce by a certain act. You could have a table, you could make an act for it and say, well, how do we do it? It's a procedure, right? Nothing like that in the ancient world. Radically different from anything you see in utilitarianism. at any rate. And it's more or less kind of a science, a precise science. Nothing like that in Aristotle. You're not going to get exact answers. You're not going to know always in advance, given some procedure, how it is you're supposed to live, right? And Aristotle's particularly that way. You've got to mess around and figure it out kind of as you go along, but if you got your head in the game, you're going to be better at it. So we've got to be content discussing things like ethics to demonstrate the truth sketchily and in outline, because we're just going to have generalization. You've actually got to live it. The point of studying ethics is to lead a good life, not to have a theory of ethics. He says something very much to that effect as well, which I think is pretty great. Do not look for that degree of precision or accuracy more than what nature permits. He also thinks that it's a waste of time to study it when you're young. I think this is a great slide, great quote from Aristotle. He says that, well, a young person isn't fitted to hear a lecture on political science. Political science, by the way, for the Greeks was the same as ethics, right? They didn't make a sharp distinction between political science and ethics. So it's a waste of time because kids tend to follow their emotions, not their reason. They get carried away. Also, they just don't have enough experience of living. And since ethics is about how to live, you got to get out there and give it a shot if you ever have any chance of getting good at it, right? It's a pretty sound principle, I think. But it's also important to see that while he says here why a young person isn't fitted to hear lectures on political science or ethics, he's talking about young in character and not necessarily young in years. Although the young in years and young in character usually coincide, they don't necessarily always coincide. You know, my grandfather, 17, was on a destroyer and he was fighting World War II on a destroyer in the Mediterranean. He had way different set of experiences than I did at 17, right? In terms of young in years, he might have been older then in certain respects than I am today in terms of the strength of his character given his experience, right? So Aristotle isn't just picking on the kiddos, right? He's pointing out, and the other thing is, you have to, as I said before, for Aristotle, you have to have your head in the game, and you could be, like a certain cousin of mine, 40 going on 15, right? If you're not making an effort to progress in the good life. Right? It's not an accident for Aristotle that you're good. He says human beings are not born virtuous, they're born with the capacity for virtue. If you don't actively develop it in your life, then just totally hosed, you know? Not much can be done for you. Back to eudaimonia. So what is the highest good? The highest good is happiness, eudaimonia. Right? And everyone seems to agree on that. You could probably get this crowd to agree that it's eudaimonia, or happiness rather. Happiness is what we're always trying to aim at in everything that we do is happiness. The problem is we disagree about what happiness is, right? We disagree about the substantive conception of happiness. The masses give an account which differs from that of the philosophers. The masses, and then there's the philosophers. This is an old distinction which maybe we can go into another time. But the masses there in Greek is hoi polloi, which is also a term in English for the unsophisticated. Okay? Sorry, the elitism is definitely there in Aristotle. There's no way around that. But perhaps it can be interpreted for us with a little less, in a little more democratic spirit. Let's see, eudaimonia, happiness, well-being, flourishing. Yeah, I don't like this translation. Another translation says, you can tell a person's perception of happiness by the life they lead. I don't know if it's necessarily better, but I think I like it better. You can tell what somebody thinks, what they're aiming at ultimately by the life they lead. They're out partying every weekend or on Thursday nights instead of coming to a philosophy lecture, unlike these students here, right? You can tell what their highest good is. It's pleasure, right? It's partying, right? So You can tell by the life they lead. The masses, again, the hoi polloi, the coarsest people, the average undergraduate, I'm just kidding. They see it as pleasure, and they don't, and so they like the life of enjoyment, right? It's a kind of life. Life is a way of life, the life of enjoyment. There are three especially prominent types of life: the life of politics, the life of contemplation, and the life of enjoyment, or pleasure seeking. This is Sardanapalus. Aristotle makes, I think, a very interesting comment about, he says that those who seek pleasure is not entirely their fault, though. Why? Because Sardanapalus, and you got to kind of know something about Sardanapalus, look at the way he leads his life, right? The people who are supposed to be our role models, right, or the ones who are as it were, set forward by the culture as the happy ones, if you look at the way they live, right, there's no, it's not surprising that people, that the unsophisticated or uneducated, right, the hoi polloi, that they think that pleasure is the highest good. They want to, because that's the way Sardanapalus lives. He was a king, famous one. He was. Also, there's the life of honor, the life of politics. Aristotle has some interesting things to say about this, and I think some wise things to say. Although he does not think the life of honor is, or the way of life of seeking honor is the way to go. Honor is not the highest good, but is better than pleasure. Why? Because seeking honor might, not necessarily, but it might lead you to lead a life that's worthy of honor. Maybe you might also, by hook and by crook, try and get the honor too, right? So not necessarily, but it might lead you into habits of virtue because you're seeking to be honored. But it's not the highest good. And it's not the highest good because it's ephemeral and it's dependent upon other people. For Aristotle, the highest good, whatever it is at this point, right? Happiness. Whatever happiness is, the real happiness is, it's got to be self-sufficient. And we'll get to this. It has to be. Lose my train of thought. Is it money? No. He also discounts the life of wealth. Right? Wealth is not happiness. This probably seems pretty familiar to everyone who would agree with Aristotle. Life of contemplation, as a matter of fact, is probably closer to the mark. Right? And we'll come back to that. Happiness, he says, is obviously something complete. That's the word I was looking for, sorry. Complete and self-sufficient in that it is the end of what is done. So whatever happiness is can be complete and self-sufficient. Complete in the sense that when you got it, you don't get it to get something else. It's not instrumental to some further good, right? And also, it's self-sufficient. And by this, I think the easiest way to cash this out would be to say that Aristotle, happiness is self-sufficient. Is when you got it, it completes your life. Right? It's enough. It's enough to make life choice-worthy. So it's about choosing your life for Aristotle. It's choice-worthy. When you achieve whatever this is, and we don't quite know what it is yet, right? When you achieve eudaimonia, true happiness, for Aristotle, then you've got it. Yeah. Then your life is meaningful and is worthy of is worthy of choice, right? Choice-worthy. I like that in particular, to say that your life is choice-worthy. Why would you choose to live? Right? What makes it worth living? Well, we've got to figure it out, right? We still don't know quite what it is. What is it that's going to answer to it, to happiness is complete and self-sufficient? Well, happiness is certainly complete, because you don't like seek happiness so that you can get something else, right? I want to be happy because what makes it self-sufficient? So it's possible that we might achieve, is it possible that achieve that if we grasp the characteristic activity of a human being? So again, this is common to all the ancient ethical theories. That is, they have this, and this is this technical term is eudaimonism, right? Eudaimonism is a kind of ethical theory that these ancient theories would be classified under. And that is, you find out what it is that a human being is supposed to do, what is it that makes human beings unique, and from that you determine, or something about the world is with the Stoics, and then you determine how you should live rationally in response to the way things are. So Aristotle wants to find out what it is that's distinctive about human beings, so we can find out what it is that we're supposed to do, right? His is a naturalistic view here. I mean, he's writing long before modern science, and he's certainly not a materialist and so forth, but he's very naturalistic. Unlike his teacher, Plato, he doesn't posit another world laid over on top of this one to make sense of it, right? For Aristotle, there's only this world. There's no heaven, there's no afterlife, there's no judgment. There is a God, but he's kind of a weird God. He's sort of, he's not a personal God, yeah? He defines God as thought, thinking itself, because what else would a perfect being think about except a perfect being? So he's not into it, right? He's doing his own thing. So you don't have any of that. Arguably you could have in Plato. So what he's after here is the function of a human being just qua human being, just insofar as they're a human being, right? Because insofar as I may, or you may play a musical instrument, right? If you play a flute, there's a certain function called flute playing, and you can determine whether or not the flautist is a good flautist based on how well they play the flute, how well they fulfill the function. So if you want to find out whether or not someone's a good human being, just insofar as they're a human being, then you need to know what the function of a human being is, so that you can tell by the way they lead their life whether or not they're any good at it. So for Aristotle, you can fail at being human pretty spectacularly, right? By missing the mark. Yeah, and there's this playing a musical instrument is a pretty common metaphor that he uses for the moral life of a human being. Well, what is it? It's reason. Yeah? I'm not going to go through the argument, which is not a very good one, that he uses to determine the characteristic activity of a human being. But he says that it's reason. Reason is the characteristic. It separates us off from all the other beings. It's, as it were, our specific difference in nature. What makes us not plants or non-human animals, for Aristotle. It's our ability to reason. So that activity is really going to be the highest activity of a human being. And when we're doing that, we're doing what we're supposed to do for the kind of thing that we are in nature, right? The problem is, I'm not going to read all this to you. The problem is that for Aristotle, we have, so kind of like, this is greatly oversimplifying, like the highest thing that we could do is live the life of contemplation, hang out, and do really hard math all the time. That would please Aristotle, like, just hardcore. That's why? Because that's our special business, right? Our special business with the world is to think, to contemplate it, to do really hard math. Especially, he would have been impressed with probably hard geometry. But unfortunately, we have bodies. Unlike God, thought thinking itself, human beings have bodies. So we can't just like spin with the spheres in the heavens. We've got to like feed our bodies. And we've got to live with other people. We've got to give lectures, to put it on our MBOs. We've got to like fill our evenings. We have to, raise children. We've got all this other stuff that we have to do because we're not just rational beings, right? So we have to live with others. Yeah? So we need not just what he calls the intellectual virtues, one of which is very important for what we're going to do. But we also need the moral virtues. So for Aristotle, there are a whole set. He gives a list, which are, we can look at it in a second. I have a handout for you. He gives a list of virtues. Virtues for, here's a list of virtues. Virtues, interesting. It gets us back to the metaphor of playing an instrument. Virtue is arete in Greek. And it means excellence, quite literally. And so if you're talking about the guitarist playing the guitar, then, and you say, wow, he's a really excellent guitarist. And you talk about someone who's courageous, has the virtue, he's an excellent human being with respect to courage. So virtue. Virtue means excellence. We're looking at moral excellence, right? When we think about virtue. Yeah. How do you get to be an excellent, anybody play a musical instrument? This metaphor is pretty powerful, actually, I think, especially if you're a musician. Do you play? What do you play? Heather, I forgot your name.
No, I don't play anything
You don't
very
play?
well.
Does anybody? Nobody play? This is the first crowd this size that I've ever talked to. Yeah, you have two. You have artists. Artist works. Artist works. The guitar works better. I love it when I have guitarists.
I can
Right?
play the guitar, but not good.
All right, well, that's good.
It's bad, it's bad.
Yeah, so you're like my friend in high school, right? Wanted to play the guitar for one reason, just so that he could get a date, right? So he gets the guitar, he buys like this Fender, not you, but he gets this Fender Stratocaster, because he wasn't good at it. Not that you were trying to play the guitar for those motives. But, he goes out and he buys this, Fender Stratocaster, and I go over to his house after school, and we're hanging out, because we're high school kids, he's in his bed, and he's like, got this, he didn't read music, but what do they call this, pictures of the fretboard, where to put your fingers. It's a cheat, right? He's got like a whole book of those piled around him, and he's just like holding the guitar in his lap like a zither, right? And he's kind of moving around and plucking it a little bit. And he's, you know what that means? You know what it is, right? Let's make it in. I have no idea what you're playing, right? Because he sucked at it, right? And I knew that he sucked at the guitar because I know what the guitar is supposed to sound like. I know what an excellent guitar is supposed to sound like. And it was not what Dan was doing, right? But he practiced. And the more he practiced and developed good habits, right? It didn't feel good always to practice. And this is probably good also in art, right? It doesn't always feel good to practice. With guitar, I remember his fingers would be sore. I never played the guitar, but I have friends who did, and they said it feels like your fingers are bleeding, right? It hurts when you until you build up like calluses on the tips of your fingers, right? And then pretty soon, it doesn't hurt anymore. And in fact, if you have a bad day, you want to go home, and all you want to do is zone out and play the music, and it feels good. It's what makes you feel good. But only at the end of it does the good feeling come. For Aristotle, it's the same thing with the moral life. It doesn't always feel good at the beginning. We're not naturally virtuous or excellent human beings. We're just born with the capacity for it. And yet, if you work at it, if you make the effort, if you suffer a little bit in the beginning, especially when you're young, and if you're lucky enough to have good models, right? This is really important, Aristotle. If you're lucky enough to have good models in your life, if your parents are also good human beings, if you have good friends, your friends are excellent human beings, right? And you put the effort in and you develop the habit of virtue, you're going to get better at it. And eventually, you'll be so good at it that it'll actually feel good to be good, right? And it takes a whole life. Very different from Stoicism. Aristotle doesn't think you're ever done. The Stoics, who much later than Aristotle, and in some ways very similar, they're eudaimonistic theory, but the Stoics, you become a Stoic sage, and you achieve what they call ataraxia, and that's true eudaimonia for them, and you can't lose it. The Stoic sage is sort of like nirvana. There may actually be real influence from the East in that concept. But at any rate, for Aristotle, it takes your whole life. You can't stop doing it. You do it your whole life. Takes a complete life. Because one swallow does not make a summer nor a day. Neither does one day or a short time make someone blessed or happy. And you should also enjoy being good. You wouldn't call someone a person just if they didn't feel good about the justice. But if you think about it, You know, maybe when you're young, if you're in high school again, right? You're in high school and you're honest, and you do, but it didn't feel good to be honest, maybe because now you're ostracized, because your friends got in trouble because of your honesty. So it doesn't really feels kind of bad to be honest, but you did the same thing, you did the right thing anyway, right? In time, Aristotle said, so that doesn't really count, Aristotle's saying, right? You wouldn't call that person honest if it doesn't feel good to be honest. The action itself didn't feel good. Right? But it takes time for it to feel good. It won't when you're still practicing. Right? So we've got to use reason. Well, I'll get to that. No one will call a person just if they don't enjoy acting justly, or generous if they didn't enjoy generous actions. You give money to the poor, right? You don't feel good, but it makes you look good. That doesn't count. You're not a generous person if it doesn't feel good to be generous. Aristotle's practical, so right? Happiness, as eudaimonia, is doing the human thing well. Right? It's flourishing. Just like a dog flourishes, if they have what they need to do the dog thing, it's flourishing, it's a happy dog. It's flourishing, it's doing the dog thing well, for the kind of thing that it is. Human beings are happy, we flourish when we do well the thing we are, when we do well the thing we're supposed to do for the kind of thing that we are in nature, for Aristotle. Right? Does that make sense? But there are external goods that you have to achieve too. We might have a different list than Aristotle, again with the elitism, it's just a Greek thing. You know, there was a warrior society. When we look at the virtues in more detail in a minute, they're definitely, look at it and think about a male Greek aristocratic warrior. Those are the list of virtues are drawn up with that in mind, right? So I'm not endorsing uncritically the thought of Aristotle, but I think that there's some wisdom here for us to click on and add to our cart, right? So nevertheless, this happiness needs some other stuff. One thing I want to point out is he points high birth, noble children. Right? The Greeks were really kind of in agreement here about the importance of having good children. Right? If your children turn out bad, it's going to ruin your life. If you were right, a halfway decent person, that seems true. Again, with the title of this book. Beauty, you have to have a certain amount of personal beauty. I don't know. We can. Yeah. You're childless. You have to have kids to do the human thing well, for Aristotle. It may be up for debate today. But there has to be, if you lose all your money in the stock market, you don't count as being happy for Aristotle. Another big difference with Stoicism. And in fact, losing everything that you have is exactly the experience of Epictetus, who is the Stoic sage, probably the most commonly read of the Stoic sages. He was, no, not Epictetus, Zeno of Citium. Zeno was a Stoic sage and literally lost everything. He was a merchant and his ship went down with all of his stuff on it. It wasn't insured. Boom! So he lands in Athens, wandering around, and goes to a bookstore, picks up a book, and it was Xenophon's Memorabilia, or Reminiscences of Socrates. He asked the bookseller, hey, where do I find one of these philosopher cats? And the bookseller says, well, there's one right there. It was Athens. It was thick on the ground with them. So that's how he got started, right? At any rate, but you could lose everything and still come through it. Right? With apatheia, or this not being unmoved from what is not under your control. For Aristotle, though, you lose everything, your ship goes down, it's going to ruin your life, and that's just the practical side of things. You know, your family dies in a plane accident, you don't count as being happy anymore. So there's this practical constraint. I think most people would agree is probably easier to understand than the Stoic contrast, where he has these Epictetus, who was born a slave and was lame, right, had a pretty terrible life early on, but eventually became free. And he was the other important Stoic sage. You know, he says things that are pretty crazy. He says, like, you have a piece of pottery and it breaks. Say to yourself, but it was So too, when you kiss your wife goodbye in the morning, say to yourself, if she dies, she's just a wife, I guess. I don't know, this is the example that he gives, that you're supposed to be unattached to things which are not beyond your, that are not within your control. But that's Stoicism. Comes much later and you probably won't have time for it. Aristotle is practical. You have to have a certain amount of prosperity. You have to have a certain amount of money. The self-sufficiency is common to also the Epicureans. Argued you need only 3 things for happiness. The Epicureans said you need self-reflection, self-sufficiency, and true friends. At any rate. They're all sort of riffing off of Aristotle, who comes much earlier. Yeah, but if you were on your way to eudaimonia when you are struck down by adversity, by bad misfortune, no matter how bad it is, you'll never become, as a different translation has it, completely miserable. Right? The eudaimon, or the eudaimonic person, or one who's almost there, who's made great advances, the virtuous human being is never going to be completely miserable. Will be able to bear up with honor and dignity, even under adversity. Whereas someone who isn't virtuous, it will crush them, Aristotle argues. And then he has this great line: the shoemaker makes the noblest shoe out of the leather that they've been given. So we're tasked to make the best life with the life we've been given. There's a little Stoic ring to that as well. Finally, the eudaimonic person, right? Final definition of happiness. The point of our life, to put a more sharper edge to it, it's the point of our life. It's what we're supposed to do for the kind of thing that we are in nature, is to live a certain kind of life, the eudaimonic life, to achieve happiness. Happy person is one who, adequately furnished with external goods, engages in activities in accordance with complete virtue, not for a little while, but for the whole run. Right? Virtue, excellence, arete. We're talking particularly about the virtues of character. What does it mean to be of excellent character? Well, there's 2 kinds, intellect and there's character. We're going to focus on the virtues of character. Virtue comes through habituation, and we sort of already talked about that. I use the example of playing a musical instrument. You get excellent at it. In the same sense, you become courageous and truthful by doing truthful things, right? Aristotle argues that virtue, or the right action, the excellent action, when you finally come around to activity or right action, is always a mean between extremes. Vice, which is the either a deficiency or excess. So the virtue, the excellent activity, is it's a mark, it's hard to hit, right? Because it's somewhere in between. I say somewhere in between. It's not a mathematical mean, it's not an average, it's not exactly in between, right? But virtue, or excellent character, is found between deficiency and excess. We'll get another slide up. Yeah, like this. And likewise, too much food and drink and too little ruin your health. The right amount produces and increases and preserves it. And the same goes then for temperance, courage, and all the other virtues. The person who avoids and fears everything, never standing his ground, becomes cowardly. If you fear nothing, then you become just an idiot, right? You don't know what to do. So it ruins your character. Your character is built up over the actions of your life over a lifetime, and the effort to do the right thing in each opportunity, right? And again, with Aristotle, you have to have your head in the game. The Greek word there's a nice Greek word for this, is phronesis, which is usually translated as practical wisdom. Practical meaning having to do with action. Right? Aristotle calls this practical science. Right? It's the science of what we should do, how we should live. So, phronesis is practical wisdom. It's using your reason to figure out what the right thing to do is. It's the intellectual virtue that's in play when you're attempting to realize the moral virtues in your life. And you get better at it the more you use it, just like with math, right? And the other intellectual virtue. How do you get good at math? You do a lot of math. There's another thing here, the intellectual virtues are a little bit more actually, what I just said is probably not quite true. Your abilities and the intellectual virtues Aristotle thought were pretty well set. Yeah, so it's a little bit different from that. Either you're going to be good at math or you're not. You learn it by doing a lot of math, but your innate ability, as it were, is kind of set for Aristotle. You can't improve on that in the intellectual virtues. But at any rate, so temperance and courage then are ruined by excessive efficiency. The mean is relative to us. It's always different. What you're supposed, like, so courage for me could be different for courage for this guy, right? Why? Because we're different people. Again, you can't get exact answers in ethics. You just got to live it out. And you're probably going to get it partly wrong most of the time, especially when you're young, right? But the more effort you put into it, the better you get at it. And you eventually begin to see where the mean is. You're better at hitting the mean. But every individual circumstance is also going to be different. So virtue, courage in one instance is be different from courage in another instance, even for the same person. So it requires effort, and a lot of it. He uses a nice example of someone who's a wrestler, right? They're going to have a different diet than I am, because I'm not a wrestler. Similarly, with the virtues. Yeah. Confidence, appetite, anger, pity, and all the pleasures, pain, can be experienced too much or too little, in both ways, and in both ways not well. But to have them at the right time, about the right things, towards the right people, for the right end, and in the right way, that's the mean and the best. And this is the business of virtue. You've got to feel the right feels for the right things at the right time, in the right way. And he says it a little later in the same book. That's why it is so hard to be good. I think we live in a culture increasingly where there's a sort of expectation that goodness is just just kind of happens because everybody's kind of naturally good. You don't have to do much. Aristotle is a nice correction to that attitude. I just call it an attitude, right? It's not really a philosophy. It's not, if you push somebody on it, they're going to push back on you. But if you look at the way oftentimes the moral life is exemplified in contemporary culture, I think it's the complete opposite of this. It's like, this falls out that I have to do the right thing because I trust my inner self. Aristotle having none of that. It's hard work to be good. And only a few people manage it, right? That's another corollary here. Only a few people manage it. Some people don't manage it because things completely beyond their control. Some people are just too lazy, right? They never, or they have, start on the wrong foot because they have bad parents, or so on and so on. There's only so much you can do. This is the world that we live in, right? So it's a very practical in the other sense, as other sense of practical as well. Here's a list of virtues. I can't read this. I'm assuming you guys know better than mine for distance here, but yeah. So this is great. I want to have a refrigerator magnet when I teach this, hand it out to my students, right? So they can have it there on the refrigerator. And Aristotle would say, just take a look at it and choose one of those virtues and make a little effort every day. Like today I'm going to think about generosity. Put an effort into being a generous person today. I mean, maybe all of them as the circumstances allow, but think about what? Yeah, these are the courage, temperance, generosity. Some of them we don't have names for in English very well, right? Proper ambition, proper pride, truthfulness, patience, friendliness, righteous indignation, modesty, Wittiness. I like that he puts wittiness on there. If you're boring, you can't tell a decent joke, you can't be a good human being. You're like a, maybe it's not the biggest failure at the core of your humanity, but it is among you fail. You're not funny. You crack the occasional joke at the right time, for the right people, for the right reason, right? If you don't know where wittiness is. Friendliness. Put a big stock on friendship. And Aristotle does, he's got an entire section of the Enigmachean Ethics on friendship. He thinks you need good friends to be good. And the true friend is one who is her or himself, with the Greeks it was himself only. Her or himself is also on the road to virtue and who sees a coincidence in your good with theirs and actively tries to keep you back on the track, on the path to virtue. Right? It's the one that calls you out when you do something wrong. Why? Because they're concerned about the goodness of your life. And it's reciprocal. He calls that perfect friendship. And he thinks it's rare. Most people probably never achieve that. It's book 7 of the Enigmachean Ethics. It's pretty amazing.
This is a wonderful.
You like this list?
Yes, this is so good.
And he divides them up. He tells you how to make this chart in the book. So he's actually got a chart in mind. So I'm not improvising on Aristotle by putting it in a chart. In the Enigmachean Ethics, he tells you basically to draw a chart. So right here, these are spheres of action, like responses to danger, satisfying the appetites, giving gifts, right? The type of emotion involved in giving gifts is supposed to be the desire to help people, right? Vice of too much is extravagant. If I empty my wallet when I got kids to feed, that's a vice. That's the wrong thing to do. Only a bad human would do that, right? Only a bad human would do that. An excellent human, though, wouldn't not give anything, right? And so on. It depends on your circumstances. How much do you give? I don't know. Who am I giving to? Generosity is probably a really good example of the virtue, the one that probably resonates most with us. Yeah. We can ask ourselves, is this a complete list? Aristotle seemed to think it was complete. Like that was the virtues, boom, written in stone, just like human nature was for him. Does human nature change? Do the virtues change? Can we have a virtue ethics without being constrained to on these points that Aristotle was? And what would that look like? Interesting question. So, friendliness versus obsequiousness. Obsequiousness. I think it's interesting that some of them we don't really have a proper name for. Foolhardiness, for example, with courage. I guess that works, but it's not something like that, and that would be the vice of too much confidence in response to danger. Too much confidence in response to danger. Foolhardiness, all right, but foolhardiness kind of doesn't, it doesn't roll off the tongue, right? But everybody knows what cowardice is. Oh, why? It's the more common vice with respect to this sphere of action. All right? Most people don't have that problem. It's the problem with cowardice is much more common, and it's like preserved in our language that way. We don't really have a proper word for the deficit there. We have to kind of wing it with foolhardiness. The same thing with, anyway, I can't remember the other one I used to do this. But some of them don't really roll off the tongue, and that's probably why. Again, you got to think things through. Think about your life. You have to apply reason. This is the common approach in the ancient world. You're going to use reason. Reason alone is also a motivating force, as we saw in an earlier slide by Cooper, right? Reason itself, rationality, is a motivating force to action. Because it's rational, you should do it. There's a normative element, right? Normative has to do with should and ought. It makes it moral, gives it moral force. So it's normative. It prescribes certain actions or behavior. Reason does. We think of reason as somehow separate, right? But the Greeks thought, no, it's supposed to pull you in and get you to do one thing rather than another.
In self-help world, you're not supposed to say should or ought.
Really?
So, yes.
So it's not not normative.
It's not normative.
But it is. They just don't use the word probably. I'll have to explore this.
It's just like you should, what should.
Should and could, well, yeah. That's yeah. So ethics, they're all about what you ought to do. Let's see. Virtue is the state involving rational choice, consisting in a mean relative to us and determined by reason. The reason, that is, by reference to which the practically wise person would determine it. It is a mean between two vices, one of excess, the other deficiency. I like this bit here because it's kind of funny. Practically wise person, as the practically wise person would determine it. Again, you're not going to get precision here. What is virtuous? What are you supposed to do? You're supposed to do what the person who knows what to do would do. What's the right thing to do? You're supposed to do what the person who knows what to do would do, right? The practically wise person, the one who knows what to do. That's what you're supposed to do. That's why it's good if you have models in your life. And you have to just become one. It's better if you have models. If your parents, your uncle or whatever, somebody in your life is a practically wise person who's been at this business of virtue for 40 years and is pretty good at it. And 40 was about the peak for the Greeks, right? It's a term that's escaping me now. But right around 40, they thought a man, misogynist, right? Thought a man at about 40 hit their peak. Point. After that, it was all done.
Sorry, okay,
so
sorry.
it takes in theory that about 40 years to be any good at this, for the Greeks. But that's just a cultural prejudice. It's the period of flourishing was about 40. Yeah.
Do you think that implies that a person should have many models that are experts in a variety of things?
Yep,
Or
that's even better.
At the time, was it like people were experts in so many different things that you could have fewer models?
I mean, no, I think maybe, I don't know where Aristotle specifically addresses this question, but I think the more the merrier. The more virtuous people are in your life, or people on the path of virtue, the better. It's way easier to have, like with friendship, for example. Why have one perfect friend if you have two? I guess you would be down with that.
For Aristotle, at the time when people have to have more skills, and so therefore follow less people as models, you think?
I'm not sure I understand the question.
I'm trying
You
to
need fewer?
yeah, I'm trying to I don't want to use the term Renaissance man because I don't think that's the same time period, so but
Yeah. Well, you needed to be. I mean, for Aristotle, this is a criticism of him, right? You needed to be Greek. Couldn't be a barbarian, right? Funny root of the term barbarian. It's a Greek term, right? And at the root of it, they're making fun of non-Greek speakers because they sound like they're just saying bar. So they're just like talking crap about non-Greeks. It's hardcore and messed up. But so you had to be Greek, you had to be male, you had to be a decent warrior, or at least fit enough to be a warrior. You had to be. It helped if you were Athenian, probably if you were Athenian. And so it's definitely not. It does not map onto what we would want today. Virtue is a state. It's a state. I think maybe a better way of thinking of what virtue is. We've seen that it's moral excellence. What is it? This hasn't come across in the slides here, but I think the best way to understand what Aristotle means by virtue is to think of it in terms of a disposition. It's being predisposed to do the right thing at the right time, the right reason, to the right person. But based on sort of self-conditioning over time. It's a disposition to hit the mean. You're predisposed to know where honesty is and to feel good about it, about being honest. Not everything admits the mean. For example, spite, shamelessness, envy, adultery, theft, homicide. There's not like a mean between the extremes of deficit in homicide. Like, I only killed like one. That wasn't enough. They are wicked by definition. Kind of interesting that he puts adultery here. I always thought that was striking. He also names his wife, which is unusual in the Greek world. My sense of it is, and then his son shows up in the title of his title, my sense of it is that a difference between him and Plato in particular, it bears out in their philosophy in different ways, is he's a little bit more of a family man, right? Like Aristotle for that reason. He's more down to earth. He's a lot more practical in the ordinary sense of that term. It doesn't show up explicitly, but there's little hints sometimes. He chooses that in particular. Anyway, there's more to that about classical Greek culture. And most men in this culture would not be particularly concerned about adultery as some big wickedness. Right? This is why it's so hard to be good. This is one of my favorite bits. Because in each case, it's hard to find the middle point. Not everybody finds the center of the circle. But only a person who knows how to find the center of the circle. We're good at math, right? Example. So anybody can get angry, or give, or spend money. That's easy. We're doing the right relation, the right person, the right amount, the right time, the right aim in view, and in the right way. Only the excellent person can do that. Nuances. Yeah, I've already kind of hit on this. Some extremes, like with courage, we don't even have a proper name for foolhardiness or the deficiency of fearlessness in the face of danger, right? Yeah, some are closer to missing mark than others. Also, people are different, right? I might have to really work on courage because there's just something about me, or the way I was raised, or circumstances of my upbringing, or whatever, that just courage is not as easy for me as it is for somebody else. Well, you have to know yourself. There's, this is a slide that I won't show you, but I have, it's nice, but there's a holy place in the for classical Greeks called Delphi, right? Temple at Delphi. And in the Temple at Delphi, there was two statements posted on the wall that, in a way, sum up the Greek attitude towards the moral life in general. The first one is nothing too much, and the other one is know thyself. So this emphasis of moderation and self-knowledge shows up here in Aristotle. He cashes it out in great detail, but at its root, it's nothing too much and know thyself. Nothing too much, it's the doctrine of the mean. Virtue is the mean between the extremes. And know thyself here is you got to know, you have to be honest with yourself. If you know you have a problem with cowardice, you got to work on it. You can't lose. All right, this was the Stoicism, but I'm not going to go. I think that's enough. Any questions?
So, in antiquity, were people following different paths philosophically? It's like, we'd be at a party, and I would be a Stoic, and you would be an Epicurean.
You would spill your martini on me, and I'd be like, oh, is that Araxi? He's a Stoic. So it would be fun. People used to, so philosophies as a way of life is the way you should put it. Maybe I could say that, kind of generalizing, that in the classical period you have Socrates, and then there's Plato and Aristotle. And following the death of Socrates, Plato, of course, picks up one strain of influence. There were other strains of influence. Socrates had other followers who sometimes depict a very different Socrates in their writings. Socrates wrote nothing. So that's sort of the classical period. And then there is the Hellenistic period, which is probably really the richest period, and it's the one that most people focus on. In the Hellenistic period, you had Stoicism. There was like a whole menu of real bona fide ways of life. Aristotle's is philosophy as a way of life, yes, but it's not the kind of, it doesn't share as closely with, say, religion, a set of explicit doctrines and ways of life, as it were, like, such as the Stoicism would, or Epicureanism, and some of these other philosophies as ways of life that flourished during the Hellenistic period. Hellenistic period is from the death of Alexander the Great, 323, to, I guess, the beginning of the imperial period of the Roman Empire, around 30, 31. And then there's the Romans, who were really doing Greek philosophy, which is, and even in Greek, probably most of that time. And then it becomes, and then it kind of declines with the rise of Christianity, gains kind of this hegemony over the intellectual life of the Roman Empire as it collapses.
And is that because Christianity includes philosophy as part of its teachings, or?
Yeah, I don't know. It's kind of, I think I said, kind of in competition, or it's reacting to this pagan idea of philosophy as a way of life. And it really is kind of a pagan idea. Comes from.
I see a lot of that in Christianity.
Yeah. I mean, Paul of Tarsus might. I don't think anybody really thinks this anymore, but for a while, maybe somebody does. It's not my specialization, but there was some talk about maybe Paul actually knew Seneca, the Stoic sage Seneca. Seneca was a Roman emperor. Was a Roman senator, famously commanded to commit suicide by Nero, and just said, "All right, cut his wrist, took a warm bath." So he may have known him, and there's at least some indication, and I can give you chapter and verse on this, but that my understanding is that Paul, it's pretty clear that Paul in the New Testament, his writings that we know are actually penned by him show that he has read the Stoics, that he knows what Stoicism is all about, and he's influenced by it.
That is not surprising.
That is not at all surprising.
No. And also, I mean, you can say the same about Islam, you can say the same about Buddhism. I mean, what interests me is why ancient religion didn't have philosophy as an integral part of it.
Ancient religion?
Right.
Yeah. Why Christianity is kind of different in that
Yeah,
respect.
and
They're like, oh yeah, we'll just Christianize this pagan ideas, and it's I don't know enough about the pagan religions of that time, but there is this kind of sense in which Christianity, you might say, is in between philosophy as a way of life on the one hand, the pagan philosophy, and on the one hand, and the sort of mystery cults kind of on the other, right? He's kind of in between. It kind of partakes a little bit of both of them, and then wipes them both out eventually. It's interesting. So was it that bad? Nobody walked out, I guess.
No, there is really, really fun.
I'll ask a question. Would Aristotle say that animals cannot experience eudaimonia because they cannot reason?
No, I don't know.
Oh, he would. So he should say animals can experience eudaimonia.
And if your dog, I bet you cash money that your dog counts as definitely flourishing. My dog, Daisy, is a eudaimon doggy. She's got everything she needs. She does the dog thing well. Barks at the deer in the front yard every morning. She chases bunnies. She plays with the neighbor dog when it comes over. Runs around. Lots of exercise. She does the dog thing well. Does well the thing that she's supposed to do for the kind of thing that she is.
Wouldn't you say that all animals are perfectly good, supposed to be, if you leave them alone, they
What do you want?
they perfectly control themselves, no human being except for one time?
That's why we don't fault them.
Isn't that interesting though?
Yeah.
I find that really interesting.
Human
We have to
beings,
work to be human.
we can fail. Well, animals aren't morally virtuous, though, right? So it wouldn't make sense to talk about a morally virtuous. My dog is sweet, but I don't think Aristotle would say that it makes sense to talk about whether or not right or wrong or morally responsible and so forth. Right? But you talk about a vicious dog, right? Tied on a short chain in the backyard and beat it once every 3 days. It's gonna be mean. Yeah. Doesn't have what it needs to do the dog thing. It's a vicious dog. It's full of vice, right? So I think the metaphor that he uses is pretty good. It carries over with animals. Plants, yeah. bought an orchid once, on a whim, at the store, and got this orchid, and was paying close attention, and it starts looking really, really sad, and its leaves are all wilted up, and so I get on the internet, figure out what it needs. Gotta have some little acid stuff with soil, and just the amount of light for so many hours, and blah, blah, and it goes, sure enough, it shoots up this one little stalk one day, and gorgeous. I looked it out one night in the winter, completely done. But anyway, yeah, it was flourishing. That's why I like flourishing as a translation for eudaimonia. Although happiness is not wrong, and that's the usual translation, to be clear. But I like flourishing because it works with the orchid, it works with Daisy, my doggy, and it works for us. But the only difference is we are the kind of beings for whom we need moral virtues. Yeah? We need moral excellencies. So that puts us apart. Good animal question.
Have you ever thought about why humans are the only animals have to have moral virtues in order to be who we're supposed to be? Why?
Why not other animals?
Yeah, why?
I forgot this is the dog park.
No, I mean, it's just really interesting that the whole natural world works in a certain way, and then there's human beings that have to but we're
How come morality is restricted to human beings?
Yes,
How come we're the only moral beings?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Although I read a book called The Moral Life of Animals, and he was saying that they have a moral life, it's theirs, it's not ours.
It's theirs, it's not ours.
Yeah.
Well, maybe that might be an answer. I mean, this is human virtue, and I mean, Aristotle kind of says that. It is restricted to human, but I don't think he was saying that there's a doggy moral virtue, just excellence in general about other things. Dog is excellent hunting of rabbits. Yeah.
So we don't just
Why us?
to our
What's special about us?
Just if you leave us alone, we're heroes.
I don't know. So I don't know what the answer to that would be.
Well, it wasn't.
I'm tempted always to think of it's a big question about what is human nature, right? This is a big problem. You can get what's called a moral law theory of ethics out of Aristotle, and Thomas Aquinas does that in the Middle Ages. You can also get one out of the Stoics, where there's sort of like right and wrong are built into the nature of things, and are determined. Our duties are determined by the nature of things. Among other things, our human nature. But the idea of human nature has kind of gone by the wayside, and a lot of don't believe that there is some one thing. How do you specify? And it seems like reason, for example, probably isn't very good, especially if you think about the human evolutionary history, and there's going to be humans that probably had pretty powerful reasoning abilities that were not human beings, not Homo sapiens, right? So we have to count them as well. So in non-human animals probably also have reasoning abilities. Put my money on language, but yeah, they do a lot of things that we do. There's almost nothing that we can sort of specify that there isn't some other creature in the animal kingdom that can do that or exhibit that ability just to a different degree, right? Probably true. Language even might be one. But for my money, I think it's the best candidate for what makes us different, and it might also give us our distinctiveness with respect to morality. Language is a crazy thing. My 2-year-old, she's completely mastered this thing called language. Language. Completely mastered this thing that we do called language that I'm doing here and that you're doing in a way by understanding me, right? And it's wild. This ability to take a finite set of symbols and follow a finite set of syntactic rules and make an infinite number of sentences. We can only do that. No other thing that I know of can do that. Even like Coco the gorilla with sign language can't do that. Yeah, manipulate signs in this way. It seems to be the remarkable thing about, for me, the remarkable thing about human beings. And like I say, my 2-year-old at 24 months on the planet, can so outperform linguistically the highest conceivable primate besides us.
So you think that's what makes it?
So that might be the best candidate. I always kind of want to go back to language.
And then the first thing that pops into my mind is, in the beginning, is the word.
Yeah.
It's very cool.
That's cool. Thank you. And I'm just shooting the shit, so don't quote me on that. Making it up as I go along.
I didn't tell you.
But you really must have watched at least one show over at Dr. Phil.
Right.
You
I
can't
need to
talk
watch
about
one
it
show of
anymore.
Dr. Phil.
You make these comparisons, and then I've never seen them.
I've been told that since my name is Phil, that I have to, and I'm an author, that I have to redeem that the title.
You could regress to the ancient.
Relax my brain, go on
Do
YouTube.
you watch it after
Where
Phil?
everything becomes interesting,
Yes.
no matter what.
All right. What time do we have? Are we ready to go?
I
Release
think
you?
it's probably a good time to.
Probably a good time?
Yeah. It's 5 minutes.